Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, Parag, Agrawal, Shantanu, Narayen, these are just few of the many Indians who've managed to snap up top jobs at global tech companies. At the most recent count, 60 of the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are of Indian origin. So what is it that makes Indians be accepted as leaders of global companies? Is it something as fundamental as education and managerial skills, or more abstract factors like upbringing and value systems, or the more mundane attributes like a willingness to relocate and the will to adapt swiftly to new environments? It's not just business. Even in the complex world of politics, we're seeing the rise of leaders with Indian roots, from Kamala Harris in the US to Rishi Sunak in the UK. Now, what does this trend mean for and to the Indian diaspora? Has India's progress and growth on the global stage helped push the acceptance of Indians at top global roles? These are just few of the questions that we're asking today as we take stock of India at 75. And as part of the 2022 Diaspora Global Forum, a three-day event featuring business leaders, artists, philanthropists, and other prominent people of Indian origin who hail from across the globe, I'm joined today by two people who have, in fact, lived this trend. First, veteran banker Piyush Gupta, who currently serves as the CEO of DBS Group, born in Meerut and armed with a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi and an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. He's also the Vice Chairman of the Institute of International Finance. He worked at Citi for over 20 years, becoming the CEO of Citi's operations in Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand before joining the DBS Group as its CEO in 2009. Also with us on today's show is Prem, the founder and chairman of Canada-based Fairfax Financial Holdings. This Padma Shri awardee from Hyderabad holds a degree in chemical engineering from IIT Madras and MBA from the University of Western Ontario. His success story at Fairfax involves the takeover of a small insurance company on the verge of bankruptcy and turning it into a giant with annual revenues of nearly $20 billion in 2020. My third guest this evening is no stranger to the travails of managing a global company and in the highly competitive field of healthcare, no less. Shobana Kamineni is the Executive Vice Chairperson of the Apollo Hospitals. From hospitals to pharmacies to diagnostic centres to drug R&D, home care and telemedicine, the Apollo Group has a formidable and growing presence in almost every facet of healthcare, not just across India, but across Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Gentlemen and Shobana, many thanks for joining us on this very special conversation. And I want to start with you, Prem Watsa. We're talking about the rise of CEOs who are of Indian origin, 60, as we just pointed out at last count, heading Fortune 500 companies. Your story, in a way, explains to us the distance that has been covered. Born in Hyderabad, went to IIT Madras, and then you left India to go to Canada with $8 in your pocket. I believe your brother supported you. You did door-to-door sales for an appliance maker for a while before you actually got started on your entrepreneurial journey. Explain to me what it took to leave India with $8 in your pocket and make it big in Canada.
Shereen, thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you today. With Piyush and Shobana and yourself, and celebrating 75th year of independence for India. My story is very similar in North America. First of all, we as Indians have a huge, we have a huge advantage because we came from a democracy. I was 22 years old. I left India. I actually went to IIM Ahmedabad, where Piyush went. And my dad said to me, you must go where your brother is. There's not a lot of opportunity in India. This is 1972. And, I'm 22 years old and I'd met my wife-to-be, but I listened to my dad. Best decision I did, went to Canada, no money, but a good family. My father was a teacher. My father's, the values were very good. And that's a big plus of Indians, I think, in the United States and rest of the world. Really good values and hard work, family-oriented, treating people well. And so I went to Canada, did an MBA. I lived with my brother. See, my brother was about 30 years old. I'm 22, and he opened his house. He didn't have a lot of money either, and I stayed in a little room. And but Canada and the United States has massive opportunity, Shereen, and so I was able to take advantage of it. And over 37 years now, built a good company, good values. And I am so excited about what's happening in India because it's a similar opportunity set that's coming with Mr. Modi.
Well, we'll talk about the India story in just a second, but what a fascinating story, Prem Watsa, that you just shared with us and our viewers. Piyush Gupta, if I may address the very same question with you. Very different stories, very different narratives. Here was Prem Watsa, who left with $8 in his pocket to try and make it big in Canada. You, of course, moved up the ranks of Citibank after spending 20 years there and then moved to Singapore and joined DBS Group in 2009. What do you believe is the playbook that has enabled people like Prem Watsa and you to make it to the top global jobs, to the top global positions? Prem talked about democratic values, family-oriented values. He talked about the ability or the culture of keeping people at the heart of decision-making, which is really how a lot of us have grown up with. What, to your mind, is the playbook that has enabled this success?
So, Shereen, first of all, let me echo Prem's words. It's a real pleasure to be on the show. This whole Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, 75 years of Indian independence is actually quite a cool thing. But, to address your question specifically, it's quite clear. It's not, one size fits everybody. Prem said the best decision he made was not to go to IIM Ahmedabad. I have to tell you, the best decision I made was going to IIM Ahmedabad. So I guess, it's different strokes. But, when I look at all of the successful Indian diaspora and business, and as you were saying in your preface, in politics as well, I want to point out two things just before we, get too full of ourselves. One, the demographics are obviously in our favor. 1/6 of the world's population is Indian. And therefore, it's not unexpected that a large number of Indians in the global landscape wind up doing well. The second big positive, you could argue, why there are not more people from mainland China. And that's obviously the second big positive, this language. We all grew up speaking English. And in a world where both business and politics is English dominated, that's obviously a big help. But to be both of these things, the knowledge of English and effectively large numbers of us who are coming through a very refined selection process, get into IIT, get into, the good schools, and therefore there's an automatic selection process. I think that has something to do with it. But if you park those two fundamentals aside, I really want to point to three things, which in my experience have been particularly different about the Indian diaspora. The first of it is really the sense of hunger. And I think some of that is attributed not just to the value systems Prem talked about, but just to the fact that many of the Indians who are successful came from middle-class Indian backgrounds. If you look at those 60 CEOs, you'll find how many of them came from parents who were in the bureaucracy, civil service, teachers, professors. And therefore, they grew up in India in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where you really had to strive to succeed. And the sense of really being, you didn't have a choice. You had to work extremely hard. It shaped a work ethic which stood by Indians across their various pursuits around the world. The second, I think, is a sense of adaptability. It's so interesting, Shereen. A lot of people think that all Indians are similar. We're all brown skin and we all come from one part of the world, South Asia. In truth, all of us have grown up in a milieu where you deal with multiple different kinds of people, different languages, different religions, different ethnicities. I grew up playing soccer, football with people from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds, from the diverse kids to well-off people, from young people to old people. That creates a sense of adaptability, which is extremely helpful. You can go into all kinds of situations and people, whether it's French or German or English or East Asians or Chinese, and you adapt very quickly. So that's extremely helpful. And the third thing I'd like to point out is this idea of tenacity. You come from a system where infrastructure doesn't work. And so, this whole jugaad, the Indian jugaad, you don't have a choice. You've got to be able to have the tenacity to be able to see things through. When and in a strange way, apart from teaching you, some interesting tricks, what's interesting about that is that it teaches you, it's a great education. I used to be chief of staff, and actually I worked with Citi for 27 years, well north of 20. I used to be chief of staff to the country manager in India, Aditya Puri, in those days. I used to work till 10, 11 at night. I got shifted to Singapore to do the same job for Asia. So a much bigger job, like, multiples bigger. And I used to finish my work at 4 in the afternoon. I realized after some time that what I thought was work in India was really failure demand. I was trying to make the elephant dance. I mean, you went overseas, the elephant danced, so you didn't have to put in all that effort. So for several years, I used to think, everything in India is a waste, a lot of it. And then I realized it actually wasn't. It was a fantastic grounding and educational experience. You really learn when you have to make that elephant dance. You learn how you can make an elephant dance, and that's extremely helpful as well. So, sorry, long answer to your question, but to me, these things, I sometimes think of them as having the right hat. The hunger, the adaptability, and the tenacity, HAT, those are really quite distinctive in my experience.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it, hunger, tenacity, and adaptability. Yes, Prem, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just said, what Piyush says is so right. When you leave, we've all grown up in India, and then you leave, it's such a big advantage. You develop qualities that you never had thought you had, and you haven't had. But as he says, teaching the elephant to dance, or working hard, and with no limit. You've got only one way to go, up, because you're right at the bottom, right? And so it's a huge advantage. I've always told my children that I have a big advantage over them. I was an immigrant to Canada with no money. And so you had to work very hard, figure out how you could do well. And you learn qualities that you never thought you had. So that's just reinforcing what Piyush says.
Well, Shobana, your story is very different. In fact, it goes back to your father, who decided he wanted to make the elephant dance, but from the inside, and, set up Apollo hospitals. And now today he's a global brand trying to address global challenge and global needs. So, Shobana, to the points being made there by Piyush and Prem, I want to understand from you what your playbook looks like at this point in time as you now try and take Apollo more and more global to cater to this massive global challenge of healthcare.
Hey, thanks, Shereen. And you're absolutely right. My dad was the first one in his village to come out and to do medicine, went to the US, and it's not just him, but I think that we have to recognize that there are 30 million Indians like him that, not only hold up the NHS in England, but the US healthcare system and the IT and so many services around the world are really driven by fantastic Indians. And I think that's a huge global achievement. But my dad chose to come back, and I think the story would have been very different if he had stayed in the US. And I think that the only extra quality I'd like to add to both Prem and Piyush is entrepreneurship. Indians have this huge ability to take risk and this drive, this entrepreneurial drive. And I think that's something that, was what he thought that Indians needed better. And I think it was that in healthcare. And in doing so, we built this organization that a premium organization at a price point that could actually benefit many, many geographies in the world. So while we turn around and we're creating healthcare professionals that are world-class and outcomes also in our hospitals, this is a model that I think is required for the world as we're going to be seeing it. COVID has accelerated the digital trend, for instance, so we can deliver, we can deliver healthcare to almost every part of the world. It was about India, but there's nothing stopping us from giving telemedicine, teleradiology, and many of these facilities to the rest of the world. So we truly believe, and what we are gearing up for is that the next revolution that comes from India will not be export of services, will not just be IT purely driven, but will be healthcare, intelligence and data and IT driven. And I think there's a huge opportunity in that. One is to serve it from India. The second is, then I think that while India, of course, requires a huge number of healthcare professionals, and there's job opportunity, good paying jobs for the many Indians that come into the workforce. But we must also realize that these trained individuals, and especially the fact that that they're taught in English, have an opportunity to be relevant in countries that have a deep shortage, especially now, of healthcare workers. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to fill these gaps around the world and make India so much more relevant. So if you ask me, these are the two big things. And the last is the cost, the arbitrage, the cost for arbitrage of India continues to be there of great healthcare outcomes at a much lower price than the rest of the world. And now, as you see in the US, in Canada, and Australia, and England, the large waiting, the waiting time to get healthcare. And we're seeing actually a reverse where people are coming to India to have healthcare. So I think there's going to be a huge new opportunity for healthcare for India to serve the world.
Yes, a lot of headroom for growth, and it could be an exportable model that we could benefit from. Shobana, many thanks for sharing that with us. But Piyush, I want to come back and talk about the point that Shobana was making about the role and relevance of India, specifically in a post-COVID world. We've seen an acceleration of some of the existing trends, whether it's digitization, which is clearly an advantage for a country like India, or, the growth of supply chains and much more sort of, the disruption that we are seeing as far as supply chain resilience is concerned, perhaps could also be an advantage for India. I want to talk to you about a comment that you made, that you truly believe that this is going to be Asia's century, and the role and relevance that you see India playing within that.
Shireen, I was trying to get a word in earlier. So let me just quickly go back to something Shireen said, and I'm going to come back and answer a question. There's a place where I differ with what Shobana said. And there's one thing which I differ with slightly. And that's the fact that Indians have generally always been entrepreneurs. I'm not sure that's actually necessarily right. Through the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up in India, our capacity to take risk was very limited. And therefore, most Indians chose to go into professional services and not go into entrepreneurship. And for the longest time, that's what we found. Professional Indians, in fact, all the CEOs you talk about, all of them made their global mark, joining multinationals and growing in the professional space. I think one of the good things, the Marwadis were always great businessmen, so were, some of the community, Sindhis, maybe Chettiars, but these were pockets. So one of the big shifts that's happened in the last 10, 15 years is that this capacity to take risk has got kindled. And maybe it existed 100 years ago, but there's been a fundamental shift and change. The number of unicorns in India, the number of people willing to take that entrepreneurial step, that's fundamentally changed. I think that's something to keep in mind. So, but to move on to the question you really were asking me, I honestly believe that for important reasons, I do think that this is going to be the Asian century. I mean, demographics are generally in favor of Asia. Wealth is being created in Asia. Rising consuming middle classes in countries like Vietnam and Indonesia and Thailand, not just India. So I do think we have a tailwind. But there are two really important factors. One is, I think this geopolitics and the tensions between the US and China are, for the first time in 30 years, creating a discontinuity where, without doubt, the net incremental investment for assembly line, manufacturing capacity, etc., people are looking hard and thinking about where else they can place it. Believe me, nobody's moving assembly lines out of China. The supply chain for technology is tough to move. But at the margin, the next assembly line or the next investment, people are definitely looking at a China +1. Now, in that space, there are only 2 or 3 countries who are attracting attention. Vietnam is, so is Malaysia. But India stands out. India's got this dramatic opportunity to put those 2 million engineers, that massive education base, to work. And for the first time in a long time, I'm beginning to get optimistic about India's capacity to do the Atmanirbhar Bharat, or the manufacturing capacity we talk about. As you can see it not just in automobiles and automobile parts. There's a bunch of exports going out from India. You can see it in mobile phones. You can increasingly see it now in high-tech electronics sector, semiconductor. I think this shift is going to be consequential. And if we can keep, India's manufacturing sector up to 25% odd, that will not only create more jobs, but it will change the texture of the Indian economy. I think this is a really useful and important time for India in the days ahead. The other big thing, obviously, is consumption. And I've said this, digital consumption. The world is changing. Today, 16% of global GDP is being consumed online. What that means is that if you are digitally inclined, the world is your marketplace. And for India, which is digitally inclined, you have the capacity to do exactly what Shobana was doing. Healthcare is an obvious one. But it's not just healthcare services, it's education. even agri services, financial services, the range of services where you can start digitally exporting from India around the world. So you move out from being a services company like the Indian tech sector was to a range of products and digital services and AI-driven services. Even today, a large number of the companies are putting all the analytics and AI into India. Now, that's a short step from taking the capacities, putting them together, and creating completely new businesses on the back of that. So, completely aligned to what where Shobana was going with that thought. But therefore, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's digital services, I think the opportunities are very real for the country.
I just want to build on the opportunities issue that you spoke of, Piyush, and I completely agree with you. I think that I don't believe that we celebrated entrepreneurship enough in this country, and at least that mindset has started to change, specifically in the last 10 years with the emergence of a lot of the startups that have now come into play. And of course, I hope we don't celebrate only valuation, but we celebrate value creation as well. But Prem, let's talk about the India opportunity. And, you've been placing your bets on India for the last few years. It started with CSB Bank, ICICI Lombard, Quest Corp, Sanmar, 5paisa, Digit Insurance. I mean, there's a bunch of companies that you've already invested in. What does the glide path from here look like, given the opportunities that you believe India will continue to enjoy?
I think what you said, and I think what Piyush said, there's unlimited opportunity in India. You got a population of 1.4 billion. For the first time in a long time, you have very business-friendly policies, Shereen. And with business-friendly policies, you're going to attract, make in India, attract foreign investment. What I love to see, what I'm so happy to see, is that Piyush talked about 100 unicorns. But the beauty of these unicorns is that whoever has a great idea, and whatever your caste, your religion, does not make a difference. You've got the opportunity to create a company because of technology, because of India's freedom, and do very well, create a lot of wealth for you. So the opportunity that Piyush talked about, and I talked about, and Shobana mentioned that you had to leave India in the 70s and 80s. Now the opportunity set, Shereen, is in India. It's right in India. It's people are coming back. Massive opportunity because of the population and because there's as the GDP grows, I'm thinking 8 to 10% over a long period of time, and we've got excellent leadership in the country. And I'm just very, very positive. And I see it in all the businesses that we've invested in. And I tell people that I know that the best country in the world today is India for investments. Unlimited opportunity.
If it is, in fact, as you point out, the best country in the world, Prem Watsa, can you put a number to that? How much are you looking to invest in India over the next 5 years?
So we've invested already about 7 billion. And we plan to double that in the next 4 or 5 years. We just think it's unlimited opportunity. Foreign investment is encouraged, is attracted to. Piyush has invested a lot of money, and we just think it's a great place to invest. And the leadership in the country from the government side, Mr. Modi, I'm a big fan. I think he's done extremely well in the last 7 years. By the way, for all the people that are watching this, there's a lovely a book that was written about Mr. Modi from about 21 perspectives. I know you must have read it, Shereen. Why is Mr. Modi so successful over 20 years from Gujarat, 10% economic growth for 13 years, and then a majority at the national level, and then a bigger majority in 2019. Just a phenomenal book, well worth reading. I would suggest that when you read that book and you see, and I thought I knew what Mr. Modi had done, and I didn't till I read that full book. You might come to the conclusion that this is one of the greatest statesmen that we have.
A quick follow-up before I know Piyush he wants to come in, but, you've been betting on banks, Prem, Watsa, and we've got a banker here on the panel as well. PSU banks are up for privatization. We don't know when the process will finally take off, but is that going to elicit your participation and interest?
Of course, there's all sorts of privatization. A major privatization, Shereen, taking place in India today, in the order of Mrs. Thatcher in the UK. And it'll attract a lot of capital from all over the world, and we'll certainly be interested ourselves.